Okay, good morning. We're going to get started this morning. And so for today, I hope you can see this fairly clearly on the screen here, because I think the ink was kind of bad on it. But today, the only activity I've really got is to talk about the exam, which is going to be available later today in Brightspace. The exam is mostly done. I've just got a few tweaks I'm going to make to it. And I'm going to talk a bit about the exam and what to expect. And this is a good opportunity for you to ask any questions. Anybody who's here, we don't have a very big crowd today here, but if you, and those who are on the live Zoom link, it's a good time to sort of ask me any questions you've got. I don't know that we'll have a session, but I mean, I'll stay in for as long as needed, because I'm here till 10:15 this morning. So those of you who are on this live call, feel free to take advantage of it. And get with me if you do have questions. Feel free to do that. So the exam itself, just talk about what the format of the exam is. It's going to be available. It'll probably be sometime early evening tonight, would be my guess. Just got a few tweaks to make to it, and it'll be available. And you can access it in Brightspace either through the weekly learning module under coursework and content, or through quizzes, coursework and quizzes. Either one, it'll get you the same quiz. Or same exam. I'll say quizzes, but it's an exam. So, and it's due for submission by midnight or 11:59 p.m. on 2/26, which is Sunday. So you'll have tonight, tomorrow, Saturday, Sunday to work on it. It'll be 90 minutes. It's the same format, identical format as the first exam. 40 questions, multiple choice, and you'll have 90 minutes to complete it. And I really think that's probably enough time. My experience is that it doesn't usually take that long to complete the exam, but you're free to use however much you like. And, you know, personally, I'm a fairly slow test taker, so I can understand using up all the time. And if that's your style as well, feel free to avail yourselves of the 90 minutes to do the exam, because it's entirely for you to take. So that's up to you there. Okay, so let's talk about the exam and what we're looking at in terms of the chapters to be covered. So we're going to cover, my notebook as I came in this morning. Here we go. I dropped everything, so things kind of in a disarray situation, but it's going to cover chapters 6, 8, 9, and 10. 6, 8, 9, and 10. Let me go and write that on the board here. And this marker is kind of weak, but I'm going to get the last of it I can. So chapters 6, 8, 9, and 10. So real briefly, what are those? And those are in the free textbook, the OpenStax book. So feel free to go in and look at that. I would really make sure that you read that, because a lot of the exam questions were sort of drawn from the test bank, which accompanies that. And which is not to say that there aren't a lot of my own questions there. There are. But some of them will go in sort of the language that is written into the exam, into the text itself. So kind of follow along with that if you want. I think it'll move you to read the book. I think it always makes sense to read the book. I know some people read it more thoroughly than others, but I think it makes a lot of sense, particularly an econ course, to go over, because I think it just presents things in another way that maybe is more clear to people. Sometimes a different way of presenting the same topic is more comprehensible. So I would urge everybody to make sure that you read chapters. So chapter 6 dealt with national income accounting, and that's a pretty big part of this exam. We talk about GDP and how to calculate it. So you want to know about the two ways to compute GDP. There's the expenditures approach and approach. And remember, the expenditures approach, we've now seen several times, and that's C plus I plus G plus X sub N. And so make sure that you are familiar with what that is, and familiar with what all the individual elements within that are. So this is the expenditures approach, which we said was the demand side of the macroeconomy. Okay, that's one way of calculating GDP. GDP being defined as the total of the entire pie. It is the entire amount of output produced in an economy in a given year, and we generally focus on the U.S. economy. That's probably the one that's most familiar to all of us, and so, but it's the same concept that applies across the world in most every economy in which data collection is active and is modern and is accurate, is reasonable. So C plus I plus G. C is consumer spending. Know the components of that, which is durable goods spending, what durable goods are, goods expected to last greater than 3 years, such as things like furniture, automobiles, appliances, electronics, computers, those sorts of things. Those are, and it would not include real estate. So real estate doesn't go into that, and sometimes people get sort of walk into that trap of thinking that houses fall into that. They don't. They instead fall under I, investment spending. So that first part of consumption, personal consumption, is durable goods. Second is non-durable goods. And these are goods as we defined them quite some time ago. That is the idea that goods as physical products that can be inventoried, moved around, etc. So non-durable goods are everything else that are not durable. So expected to last less than 3 years. It includes things like food, clothing. I know some clothing will last greater than 3 years, but for the most part, we're talking about things which are easily worn out. And the other thing too that distinguishes durable goods from non-durable goods is that one of the things that we said about them when we first discussed them were that they tended to be big ticket items. And I put that in quotes, sort of finger quotes there, because what is a big ticket item to one person may not be to another. So, but there are no question that they tend to be more expensive than the non-durable categories of food and clothing and whatnot. So, and they often are financed by borrowing. And this issue of borrowing is going to come up a bit later in the course as we focus a little bit more on interest rates. We've already begun to talk a bit about them. We're going to talk a lot more about them, particularly as they affect investment. So in the third category was services. We talked about really the importance of services and how services are growing much faster than goods production. And that's actually a good thing because it creates lots of income for the economy. And furthermore, it creates export income because we do have, quite a lot of export of services. And so remember, if you export goods and services, we have money flowing in from abroad. So foreign buyers are financing the output income of domestic producers, and the producers include foreigners. And so that's a good thing. And then imports work in just the opposite direction. Okay, every imported good that comes in represents outflow of money, and so U.S. consumers are financing the output income of foreign producers. And so, talk about that balance here more in a second. We highlighted a little bit more on it on Tuesday when we talked about international trade and capital flows, which is what Chapter 10 is about. But Chapter 6 deals with national income accounting. Then the second element of C plus I plus G was I, which is investment spending. That is the most volatile piece of total spending throughout the economy. That's a part that you want to know. The most volatile part of that by far is investment. Whereas we can say with some degree of certainty that consumption is always going to be somewhere around 2/3 to maybe 72% of the economy. So in other words, 2/3 is about 67% to about 71%. That's, even though there's some flux in there, it's pretty constant over time. And one reason why is because consumers do have some sort of a trap door that they can, or well, not trap door, maybe that's the wrong safety net, I guess is maybe a better word. That's just the opposite of what I meant. And that is if they have lost their jobs, they can get unemployment benefits, they could draw on savings, they could draw on borrowing. And this is something that's available to consumers that supports that. Whereas if the economy is in a tailspin, it may not be the case that businesses want to spend, which is what the I element is. I is an investment, and think about capital investment here much more than financial investment. Don't think about stocks and bonds really. Think about financial investment in things like real estate. Everything, all new construction fits into this I category, including residential construction. We talked about why that fits into the I category of investment, because businesses tend to build construction homes as well as commercial buildings and every other kind of structure that's non-governmentally funded. So in private sector, I includes that. It also includes what we call fixed investment, which is the category that deals with plant and equipment. It kind of goes back to that original discussion we had about factors of production, input factors, where we said we have land, labor, capital, and the capital was the original meaning of the term capital, which goes to the idea of capital goods like machinery, equipment, things like that are used to produce other goods better, cheaper, and faster. So that's an element. And the third category is changes in inventories. Change in inventories is one that's a little bit less obvious. But why is changes of inventories important here? It's because of the fact that they can signal a dialing up or a ramping down of output in the economy. If inventories are rising, that's a sign of growth, because all the factors of production, all the inputs that went into that have been paid for. And so as a result, the inventory is ready to sell. Everyone's been paid for that except for the final seller. And it's that final sale that gets recorded into GDP, but it's a sign of growth in the economy. Okay. It's the net change. It's not all simply the net change of either up or down. Okay. And the same goes in the opposite direction. If inventories are falling, it signals a drawdown in economic activity. Okay. Now, the third was government spending. We talked a lot about government spending. And some of this we are going to sort of kick down the road just a bit, kick the can just a little bit in order to talk more about it under the fiscal policy piece, because we're going to talk about government spending, not so much about what government spends money on, is it too much or is it too little? It's not really about that so much as it is going to be about what government can do in order to stabilize the economy. And that is, if the economy is going into a tailspin, can the government do something to pull it back up, to rescue it from sort of spinning out of control on the downside, or, which is where we are now, to try to stop it from overheating, because we've got an economy with extremely low unemployment rate and pretty high inflation. I mean, every bit of data that we see coming in on a weekly basis, frankly, is very, very hot. Hot meaning it's the very fast clip. Too much inflation. There's too many goods, too much money chasing too few goods. We talked about that inflation piece that's coming up in chapter 9. We'll talk about that in a second. So, what can the government do to slow things down? More on that a bit later, though. What else in chapter 6 are we talking about here? Net exports which is that final piece. Net exports is the difference between exports and imports. Know that if exports are greater than imports, then it's a surplus, trade surplus, and it's a boost to the economy. It raises GDP. When it's negative, when exports are, it's a trade deficit. And the U.S. economy has been in a trade deficit for most of the last 60 years. And so that's the thing to know about that. Okay. And then the income approach is the opposite side. It's the supply side of the macroeconomy. And we sort of sliced and diced where all the income went. And I said to the class when I first presented this on the board that I was going to cut out lots of different elements of this. And I think you might have gotten a feel for this a bit on Tuesday when I sort of presented a very detailed look at just one sliver of that side of the economy. That's the import-export side, whereas there are so many different categories, dozens of different line items. But I thought it was important to sort of cut those down just to make it a little bit more manageable and not to get lost not lose the forest for the trees. So sometimes I think we can get overly detailed with some of those line items, but nonetheless, they're there. And in the income approach, we work our way down to the personal income, which is income received before tax by consumers, by households. And then we take out personal taxes from that, which is primarily income taxes, and we get disposable income. And disposable income is what's used to generate either consumption or savings. Okay, those are the highlights really from chapter 6. We also talked about real versus nominal and know what the difference between real values and nominal values are. Real values are those which are adjusted for inflation. Nominal values are those which are not adjusted. Okay, so know the difference between that. And when we talk about real values, we're talking about real, not just real GDP, but maybe it's real consumption, it's real interest rates, it's real savings, whatever. Or nominal, all the same, all of the above there. It's whether we adjust it for inflation, and we adjust for things for inflation over time in order to account for these distortion in prices, which is really what inflation is. Okay, so there's that. Chapter 8 deals with unemployment. And so what about unemployment? And what do we need to know? What are the key things that we ought to be thinking of here? Well, unemployment, we talked about the 3 kinds: frictional, structural, and cyclical. Know what those are all about. Frictional, we said, is sort of the grab bag of all kinds of unemployment that we really don't categorize elsewhere, even including the seasonal unemployment, where those who are out of work for seasonal purposes, whether it's construction workers, agriculture workers, people who work at seasonal attractions like theme parks, ski resorts, people work as lifeguards, tax preparers, whatever. All those are seasonal employees who are not particularly surprised when their job goes away at the end of whatever the season is. So that goes into frictional, but that's also, frictional also includes people who leave their job on their own volition, or who are simply terminated for whatever reason, including even a mass layoff event that sometimes is sort of characterized as being indicative of the economy itself sort of falling down the tubes. That may or may not be it, because large employers sometimes lay off substantial numbers of workers, and it may have nothing to do with the economy at all. It may just be that they're shifting out of a particular production area that they don't want to be involved in anymore, or leaving a certain part of the country or the world. And so that these things can happen for all kinds of reasons. And those are frictional events. Okay. Structural was the second one we said was the most difficult type to deal with, mostly because the burden really lies with the worker to try to figure out what to do next. Really, government can't help there, or in frictional employment, because somebody's out of work for whatever reason. And the reason here is specific to the skills being not transferable to new jobs. And that is the idea that maybe your job has been replaced by technology and it's not coming back. And over time, since the Industrial Revolution has begun, we've seen lots and lots of jobs disappear and never come back. And they will never come back because there's no real need for them. And so that's a sort of a difficult way of looking at it. It's a problematic way of looking at it, particularly if you're on the end of things that says, well, I need to find a new job, or if I need to find new skills, because that's really what needs to happen in order to find work. Probably not going to happen in that particular area, and so you need to do something else. And the final one was cyclical, where we said this is the only one that where we need to be looking at what government can do, and that is there something that is poorly functioning in the broader economy, and what can government do? And we've really gotten into this a bit just yet in the course. That's coming up really in the next segment or two, and we'll talk about what government can do in cases in which there is that unemployment due to a very poor economy. Okay. All right. So you want to know about that. You also want to know about underemployment. We talked a bit about that. What is underemployment? It really has two different elements. One is people who are working part-time, who were previously working full-time. So they would prefer, presumably, to work full-time, but could only find part-time work. And so we don't count them as unemployed, but we count them as underemployed. And as a result, that underemployment, I gave you some on the screen, if you might look back on the video. There are about 6 different measures of unemployment that the government uses, the Labor Department uses. And one of those is what's called the U6 unemployment rate. And that's about 3% higher than what's called the official rate, what's called U3. The others slice and dice it by age. Some teenage unemployment is very, very high, but that's not really considered to be indicative of anything at all, other than the fact that teens tend to be less employable generally. I think we've all sort of been there, and they tend to move around and shift jobs a lot. But U6 captures underemployed people, particularly those who were working full-time, who are now working part-time, but we're not capturing in that official measure of U3 because they're working. They're not receiving unemployment benefits. And so that's an example of that. The other element of underemployment is the phenomenon where somebody is overqualified for a job. Whatever that means, maybe you're working maybe you're a CPA and you're working as an accounting clerk somewhere, and tallying up numbers and closing books and whatnot, collecting receivables, something that is more of a bookkeeping function, more of a clerical function, rather than something that's more of a managerial function. So that would be an example, or maybe a physician working in a blood bank drawing blood, right? That would be an overqualification. Or working in an ambulance, right? I think that would be an overqualification, but it does happen on occasion. And I don't know that we have a whole lot of physicians who are underemployed, but that would be an example. And that would probably, in that case, would be something voluntary. And I did mention that there is voluntary underemployment, and I have a sister-in-law who was voluntarily underemployed because that's what she wanted to do. So, okay, chapter 9 deals with inflation. And so when we talk about inflation, we're talking about this definition of a general increase in the overall price level. And it's not usually confined to one particular area of the economy, like energy, which is always on people's minds. Gas prices are always sort of front and center. And it's true that gas prices do go up during inflationary periods. But guess what? They also go up during non-inflationary periods. And they go down during inflationary periods. So it's not, you really can't focus on that. So food and energy are those two elements of total demand throughout the economy where they fluctuate a lot. They're up and down for all kinds of reasons, almost entirely due to supply side issues. When it comes to food products, you're talking about things like weather and precipitation. too much rain, too little rain, too much heat, too little heat, freezes, and you name it. It comes to things like that are livestock based, things like diseases and mix of various kinds of diseases like hoof and mouth disease and things like that. So these are all kinds of things that influence the supply, and hence the price can fluctuate. So sometimes we take food energy out and we have what's called core inflation. So just got to know what's going on with that. And we said there are two broad kinds of inflation. There is demand pull, and I sort of went through that on Tuesday, I believe. And it's really excessive demand, growing throughout the economy. This is, I think, sort of where we are today. I think that it's probably started out as the other kind, which is called cost push, which is a restriction in supply. Supply shifts backward to the left, raising prices. And I think that's how the pandemic witnessed its first bit of inflation, was a supply shock. And that was, we still had demand for goods, but supply wasn't there. And sellers raised the prices of goods as a result. And that, but I think now it's become a demand side phenomenon primarily because demand is so strong because unemployment is so low and wages have been rising. Now, have wages been rising at the same rate as inflation? No, they haven't, which is why I think that probably we have a bit of a hard landing ahead of us. And we'll talk a bit more about this recessionary specter that sort of looms out on the horizon here. I think that that's probably out there. It's by no means guaranteed. I don't think anybody's wishing for it, but I just think it's the reality of where things are. The economy is going really, really strong, but it's been going strong for a while. It's amazingly strong, and the government doesn't seem to be able to hit the brakes hard enough on this. And so I guess we'll find out what happens as we go forward. But those are the two types: demand pull and cost push, and know how we calculate them by the use of a price index. So know what price indexes are. They're simply a collection of goods, this idea of a basket, and what a price index is. And there are three kinds of price indexes that we talked about in class. One, it was the most commonly referred to, that you see it the most on the news, are the consumer price index, which is a market basket of goods purchased primarily by household buyers, consumers, in other words. And what kind of goods do they buy? And it sort of is a collection of several thousand goods, frankly, several thousands of goods that go into that. And they're tracked over time and over sort of space in different parts of the country. But it's what's called the CPI-U. That's an urban consumer. And we talked about some of the issues with urban consumers versus rural and small town consumers. And that was the idea that prices tend to be higher in urban areas than they do in more remote areas, rural and small town areas. Okay. So let's see here. So that basically talks a bit about the inflationary piece of that. Oh, talked about that was at the wholesale level. So know about what's going on with that. I don't think that we really got into that much in class, but it's not really as important. It just simply tracks a collection of goods. These are mostly what we call finished goods, but they're finished process some more. So we're talking about things like sheets of aluminum, right? That will go to make Coke cans or something, or airplanes. These are not, you don't go to Home Depot and buy a pallet of aluminum typically, unless you're a maker of something. And so as a result, they're not a final consumer good, but they are a final good that are used by producers. Whether it's Coke cans or, or cans of whatever, if there's so many canned goods or whatever, vehicles or whatever goes into it. All right. And then the final one was something called the GDP deflator, which is a more comprehensive collection of goods, and it takes imports out because imports can fluctuate in terms of price. There may be some distortion from a fact. One factor we did not talk about was currency fluctuations. And I wish we had more time in this course to do more on currencies, because I really think it's important, particularly since a lot of Americans travel now much more than what we ever did. And even before COVID and maybe after COVID, it's important to know what is the exchangeability of my dollars for Mexican pesos or for euros in Germany or British pounds in Britain. So you get the idea. We didn't really get into that, but what I'm saying is that those fluctuations can influence the prices of imports. And so those are taken out in order to account for, to make it more focused on production in the US. And that's why it's called the GDP deflator, the D being All right, and on chapter 10 dealt with this thing about international capital flows, and we got to do a little bit of what's called the current account and what that's about. The current account is basically the way that we sort of keep the books for not just imports and exports, but also money flows that are not necessarily tracked by goods flows. Okay, and these include things like international transfers. These are things like charitable giving and whatnot, or U.S. aid to other countries. Those are things that go into those particular categories. So there are more that go into it than just goods and services. Goods and services are a big portion of it, but there are some other elements as well, and including investment flows. This is financial investment. So sometimes we confuse ourselves maybe a bit. We talk about financial investment versus what we call economic investment or capital investment of machinery and equipment or real estate. But this is financial investment in buying things like bonds and stocks and loans or making loans and repaying loans and all those kind of things that go across international boundaries. Those are all accounted for, and I gave you this really sort of nasty looking PDF file on Tuesday. If anybody wants that, I can send that to you. I don't imagine everyone's going to be banging on my door for that, but if you want, it's there. You know, but it just kind of shows you the how we account for international capital flows, financial capital flows, and there really is a lot of measurement that's going on. Okay, all right. So what else do we want to talk about with regard to the exam? You basically want to know what some of these definitions are, like. Let me see here, like what are some examples of durable goods? Like if we talk what is a durable good, then know what those are. These are things like furniture and whatnot. Also know about the issue of final goods versus intermediate goods. It's to avoid the double counting issue. So there's a reason why we don't count in the GDP numbers the output of farmers and miners and timber producers. It's because those go into making other goods. So we don't count the output of wheat production, because wheat becomes things like grains and bread and cereals and things and feed and things like that. So if we did that, we'd be counting at every stage of the process. We'd be double counting, triple counting all the way across. If it's something like a vehicle, we wouldn't count the value of a steering wheel produced in Michigan that then goes into a car that's built in Ohio, because you'd be double counting the steering wheel and the car. Steering wheel's been counted twice. And so and by the way, it's not just the steering wheel, but it's the steering column, and it's the brakes, and it's the seats, and I mean, it goes on and on. That's why we just count the value of the new vehicle, not a used vehicle, but the new vehicle, that's new production. And presumably, that's not even really presumably is the word, but all the factors that went into that are compensated for by a person's buying that final good. Everybody that went into making that has been compensated for in terms of suppliers of their materials have been paid. And then the workers who've been involved in it have been paid their wages. So that's why we count only the final good rather than double counting. Okay. Let's see here. What else do we want to talk about? Goods are not included in that as well. So if I sell a used textbook back to the bookstore, right, then that does not include it. It's not included in GDP because it's already been sold before. Okay, so you want to know about that. Let me see here. And some of these, I'm still sort of editing these a little bit, so I'm not quite completed with the exam, but I pretty much know what we're going to be doing here. Let's see here. Then there are some examples of particular types of unemployment. So you'd be given some scenarios where this person is looking for a job because whatever, and whatever the scenario is, and then you want to classify it as frictional, structural, or cyclical, depending upon what the situation is. So you want to sort of know what those are about. Okay. Okay. Let me see here. Yeah, let me take a look here a minute. Oh, and then know about the labor force. So when in chapter 8, we talked about unemployment. We talked about how do we compute the unemployment rate, and we do it by taking the number of unemployed. This is just the most basic measure, divided by the number of labor force, and then we multiply it by 100 if we want to move the decimal. the right to make it a percentage as opposed to a decimal. But it's the same value. What is the labor force? Well, the labor force includes those working and those looking for work. And I know it seems like we're double counting on the labor force because we included unemployed in both the numerator and denominator. But we do that because the assumption is the unemployed people really are in fact part of the labor force, that the unemployment situation is a temporary condition and that they will be back. And this is different from those who have left the labor force and either are never coming back or are not coming back soon. And actually, we've seen quite a lot of people leave the labor force as COVID hit. People whose maybe incomes weren't that important to the household, maybe as a second or third income, left the labor force, maybe taking early retirement. We've seen a lot of that happen where people are just simply maybe not quite ready to retire, but didn't want to risk going back to work because of the maybe some pre-existing health conditions. And so COVID did a lot of that, created a lot of people leaving the workforce. So they're not included, they're not counted as being unemployed because they're not looking for work. So because they're not counted as unemployed, they're not in the labor force. So they're taken out. And so there's a large segment of the adult population that is not in the labor force for various reasons. Either has never worked, is looking for work, maybe is in school somewhere, is physically or mentally unable to work for various reasons, is incarcerated somewhere. All of these are elements of explanation for why some people are not in the labor force, adults that is, okay? So know what that is and how we compute the unemployment rate, okay? Let me see here. And then know about, there was something we talked about called discouraged workers. And discouraged workers are those people who are looking for work and simply can't find work for whatever reason. And when we talked about unemployment, there was a slide in our slide package, for whatever week that was, we talked about chapter 8, about problems with unemployment. And I sort of presented that sort of broad presentation as being why we should all be concerned about unemployment, even if we're not personally unemployed. And one of those is the fact that it can become really difficult to get back to work. And so be it government being asked to support people at the same time that they're not paying taxes because they're not really working very much. I know you pay taxes on unemployment benefits, but you're not earning the kind of wage. Unemployment benefits do not replace the wage. They're not really intended to. So there's that going on, but also people get discouraged. And the longer you're out of work, the more difficult it is to find work, frankly. For whatever reason, I talked about this scenario with employers, for whatever reason, they do look skeptically at people who've been out of work for a very long period. And they want to know why. They want to know, why is there a problem? And I know that may not sound fair, and probably is not fair. And it could be discriminatory, and maybe it is in some cases, where, if you don't really have a good explanation as to why you've had, one employer in 10 years, and then the last 2 years you haven't been working, then the question is, what have you been doing? So it's a difficult, problematic burden for those who are in the long-term unemployed, and some are, and maybe their jobs are going well, and sometimes I think I know that there's consternation about the sort of informal way that we look for jobs, and because we don't really have like central job placement centers like in a lot of countries, where if you're out of work, you just simply go there, do a job exchange. We have something like that in lots of cities and states, New Mexico included, job fairs, but it's usually more on an ad hoc basis. It sort of pops up here and there. And so there are people who really have difficulty finding work because, frankly, it's a skill that is sort of elusive to them, particularly if you've got issues with, putting together, good resumes, good applications, presenting a good picture and all that. So, okay. Also, we want to talk about, so we talked about the problems with unemployment. Look at that slide. And then look at, there's a slide also, and you might want to have another look at the accompanying video for that. And I talked about not only the problems with unemployment that I sort of framed as a sort of societal issue, but also the problems with inflation we talked about. And one of those problems was the fact that the borrowers and savers were rewarded disproportionately. And that is, borrowers tend to be rewarded by the presence of inflation, whereas savers tend to be punished because of the fact that one of the definitions of inflation is the loss of the value of the dollar. or the yen or the euro or whatever. But inflationary conditions reduce the value of that currency. So if you're holding it, you're losing value all the while you're holding it. And I know that you can say, well, I'm not being paid interest, but really the trick is to get enough interest to cover the rate of inflation. And that's a difficult thing. We're only now, since we're about a year or so into this inflationary cycle, where now people are talking about, okay, savings rates are finally coming up. I mean, we're seeing bank CD rates and savings certificate rates in the 4% range, which we haven't seen in a long time. I can't even tell you when the last time we've seen those kinds of yields. But that's still less than the inflation rate of 6%. So you're still effectively losing that. However, it may not affect everyone equally. And we talked about the fact that some people are affected more disproportionately than others. And I can imagine if somebody's house is paid off, they're probably in better condition to weather the inflationary condition because they don't have to face periodic increases in rent. There is no rent. Now they'll pay a higher price for fuel and food and insurance and everything else, but that's one element that will be spared. And we've seen rents rise dramatically. We really have. To the point where you've got to wonder, have we overshot the mark on some of these prices? Because we've seen some prices go up dramatically. I was telling my class yesterday that I bought some movie tickets for this weekend, and I was amazed the price of movie tickets is like double what it used to be only just a couple of years ago. And I was a little bit shocked. I wanted to make sure I was looking at it right. So maybe I need to go to a different theater. Maybe I should, before I buy them, I think I should shop around a little bit more perhaps. But you get the idea that sellers get the green light to raise prices. That's part of the issue. And it's part of the controversy over this inflationary period is the fact that maybe sellers are maybe taking advantage of the opportunity to raise prices, which is what sellers would always love to do anyways, raise prices to the extent that they can. Okay. All right. To the exam here. Trying to say, I think I've covered most of what I wanted to talk about for the exam. And I'm just sort of looking over what some of my questions are here. Hold on a second here. I don't think I missed anything yet. I've covered pretty much everything that I want to talk about. Yeah, it looks like it. So just make sure that you understand what those are for the most part. I don't think there's anything else on the exam that is not covered that I didn't just talk about here. So, sort of follow along, and I would read your book. I would look at the notes you've got from some of the class sessions. Also, the PowerPoint slides are good. They sort of encapsulate some sort of bullet pointed items. I've always tried to emphasize the fact that I think that the PowerPoint slides are probably more useful or probably less useful than what some people imagine. Frankly, I think that they're not quite as good as what some people would like for them to be, but nonetheless, that's a tool. And put all these tools together, and you should have. Anyway, you'll have 90 minutes. It'll be available sometime this evening, and have a look at it. If you have, while you're doing it, if there's a question you just don't get, you can feel free to email me. We're not usually here Friday, Saturday, Sunday, but I'm available, and I do check in pretty much every day to all the classes that I'm doing, including the online classes. So you can feel free to email me. We also have a questions link, and I don't even know if I've talked about this so much, even though you might have seen it under course discussions in Brightspace. But for those who don't attend physically or don't attend through the live Zoom feed, that you record your attendance that way. But there's also a questions link. If you have a general question that is of a non-personal sort of nature, because you don't want to ask about like a grade or whatever, where everyone can see it. But if it's a question you think everyone might benefit from, go ahead and feel free to post to that. And I'll look at that. I look at that every day, and I'll respond. If it's something of a more immediate nature, you might want to just email me and try to respond back. If you have a technical issue, and I don't think you will, because one of the things about Brightspace is it tends to be a little more stable of a system than what we had a couple of years ago. So it used to be that I would routinely get emails from people frantically emailing me at 11 o'clock on Sunday night and say, hey, I got kicked out. I have to reset it. And sometimes people have to start over again, which is no fun. But if it does happen, it happens. And we'll try to rescue whatever work you've done. But I don't really think it's happening. I just throw it out there so that you know that it's probably sunk if something does go wrong. But you want to try to finish it in one setting. I don't believe the system likes people going in and out very much, and I can't guarantee that your answers will be saved. So, but it will be available until 11:59, and you'll get sort of some hate mail message popping up on the screen if it's past 11:59. I think it's some sort of warning that sort of pops up, and I know it shows on mine as well. But it should allow you to finish, but not stay open indefinitely. Okay. All right. Questions for me? Anybody on the Zoom call who want to put anything in the chat box? Feel free to do that or speak out if you like. I think we only have about 3 people on the live call, only a couple in the room today. So, but that's fine. However you want to attend, it's perfectly fine. So, I think that's really all I had. Now, I'm available for you. I don't want to make sure you get your money's worth here. Don't want to shortchange you. So feel free to ask me any questions you like to, and I'm here to do that. So can I help anybody? Can I graph anything or draw anything out for anyone? Okay, well, I am available. I'm here on campus most of the day today. If you're around, if you're not, you can at least email me and I'll be able to respond. So I will say we'll call it in to today's session, and feel free to get with me if you have any questions. And otherwise, good luck on the exam. Enjoy it. Enjoy the rest of your week and weekend, and I will look forward to seeing you all next week. Okay.